to be prepared for the CMMC requirements for the last almost 2 years. Before I hand over the floor to you, Ms. Bozjanik, I would like to first introduce you and then talk a little bit about the CMMC network that we are running here. So the network, Ms. Stacy Bozjanik is a member of the Senior Executive Service and serves as the Chief of Implementation and Policy, Deputy Chief Information Officer for Cybersecurity, DCIO CS, Office of the Chief Information Officer. In this position, Ms. Bozjanik serves as a focal point within the DoD CIO to implement the Cybersecurity Maturation Model Certification, our CMMC program, across the defense industrial base. As the CMMC Director, Ms. Bozjanik is responsible for shepherding this critical program through the Code of Federal Regulation System rulemaking process for both the CFR 32 and 48, and ultimately implementing the program across the more than 220,000 companies that make up the DIB. This includes collaboration across the federal government with partners such as the Department of Homeland Security and the other members of the Federal Acquisition Security Council to standardize this process and truly federalize it. In this role, Ms. Bozjanik also directs the department's efforts to educate DIP partners such as us on programmatic requirements and ensures that DoD implements risk information sharing through the program's execution. Additionally, Ms. Bozjanik is responsible for ensuring the defense acquisition community is trained and capable of including these requirements in their programs and acquisitions. As you may know, prior to joining the CIO, Ms. Bozjanik served as the Director of SCRM for OCISO A&S, where she was responsible for ensuring the incorporation of integrated supply chain efforts within USD A&S. Ms. Bozjanik has an intensive career as an acquisition professional with roles that include the head of DIA's contracting activity and the Senior Contracting Officer for the Missile Defense Agency on the Standard Missile 3 Block 1A and 1B development and production program. She was responsible for cradle-to-grave execution of over 5 million of highly complex cutting-edge contracts for the U.S. missile defense systems. Ms. Bozjanik has also served as a Deputy Procurement Executive with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, where she had responsibility for establishing intelligence community enterprise-wide policy and submissions to the program management plan on an annual basis. So, Ms. Bozjanik, we are very, very proud to have you here. And as you know, Jesper, Commander Rasmussen, my good former friend still my friend, but he's a former colleague from the Navy. We're very proud that you have such strong connections with him that he actually persuaded you to join our humble group here. But not more humble that we are actually the only European CMMC group working on this level, I think. So, but what we do on Sensig here together with Jesper, we upgrade the defense industrial base. We have other actors like our NDIA. They work slightly more on the political things, and they promote export. We prepare companies for being ready to export. So that's our part of this. And in our transatlantic link and innovation bridge that we are building, Jesper is a strong part of that, along with a number of other stakeholders in the US. So I thank you once again, and then I will please hand over the cyberspace to you, and we look very much forward for your words. Please.
Well, and thank you so much for letting me log into this virtually. I do have to laugh because my work laptop doesn't have a microphone, right, or a camera. So at the last minute, I saw there was no phone number, so I'm like, oh, I've got to get my personal laptop out, right, and get logged in. And so that's why I caught the last part of your introduction, but thank you for the kind words. And that's a lot, right? I'm an old person. You can tell I've been around a lot by virtue of how long my doggone bio is. I'm going to start telling people they just have to cut the back part off of it and just give the last couple of years. But I guess one thing from you guys, have you guys heard my presentation about CMMC 2.0 and why we are where we are with that? Or I guess I can start with that and then we can go from there. So we rolled out CMMC 1.0 in January of 2020. And what we said, we put it out for people to comment. We had 4 to 5 rounds of comments on the model before we kind of launched it. And then we did the 48 CFR rule and got an interim rule justification to start implementation in November of 2020. But of course, what happened was we had an administration change. And as like new administrations do, they all want to pause and review. And so what we did was we had a tiger team put together that, to relook at CMMC, to evaluate whether or not it was meeting the requirements that we had hoped that it would, and, how could we improve it? And so one of the things when we looked at it, when we did the 48 CFR, we were given the opportunity to get public comments, and out of the public comments, we got 850, and it was a 3-rule combined. 100 of those were for the other 2 rules, and 750 were for my rule. So as a response to that, we started looking at the requirements of CMMC and trying to find a way to make it easier and simpler for our DIB partners to meet. The one thing that we need to be clear about, though, is that a lot of the consternation and frustration about the CMMC is really not about CMMC. It's about the implementation of the requirements that are prescribed in the NIST 800-171 and the cost and difficulty of doing that. And unfortunately, that requirement has been in place since 2015 and in a clause since 2017, and companies have been accepting contracts and agreeing to implement those. And it wasn't until we decided to come check the homework that people went, wait, this is expensive and we don't know that we really want to do this. So CMMC is only about the validation and assessment of the fact that you have done what you've agreed to do since 2015. So, but as a result, we took a look at CMMC and we said, okay, we're going to streamline it from 5 steps down to 3, so it'll be easier for you to go through it. We have re-looked at the controlled unclassified information aspect of it and thought that there's a potential that there still could be an avenue where companies could do self-assessment. Now, the CMMC level 1 is reverted to those requirements in the 52204-21 clause that is basic cyber hygiene, and that is only going to be a self-assessment here going forward. You have to go into the SPURS database. You have to fill out that you are compliant with those. You do that on an annual basis to make sure nothing's changed in your environment. And it also gives us an active point of contact at each company. So if we do have emergent cyber threats, we now have an active POC to be able to get information to in an instance where we need to get a threat blast out to people. CMMC level 2. We said, in CMMC 1.0, we added 20 extra requirements and 3 practices that kind of brought the maturity into the model. And it was determined that, look, if people are struggling with what they agreed to in 2015, we're not going to deviate from that from now. We're going to align ourselves and our model with the NIST 800-171, which will keep us consistent across the entire U.S. federal government to make sure that we're all having one standard. And that is one thing that we've heard resoundingly from our DIB partners is please don't make us have like a DHS CMMC or different agencies requiring different things. So we determined that we were going to align ourselves with the 800-171 and stand there. For CMMC level 3, we have chosen a subset of the 35 requirements out of the 172 to require companies to have to meet. And since our rule is now in internal coordination, I am no longer allowed to speak publicly about anything that's within the rule. So to find out what that subset is, we have to wait till March when the rule's published. So something exciting to look forward to, right? You can wait for that thing to be published and find out what, yay, what, you know, what the exciting things that are going to come out in that. And then we will accept your most kind comments with regard to that as we go through rulemaking. Now, what does it mean right now from an assessment standpoint? So when you look at the controlled unclassified information, DOD has a listing of what their categories are. I think it's 99 out of, NARA published 126 categories of controlled unclassified information. DOD has adopted 99 out of those. And when you go and you look at those, so that's another thing, is we've made a decision where we feel the line of self-assessed CUI could be, and then the higher priority CUI that would require an assessment. Of course, it's part of the rule, something we got to wait till March to come out for anybody to really understand what those are. But the logical man test works here, right? So one thing that I can repeat today, because I've already said it publicly, is that there's like categories of CUI. One of them is historical archaeological data. So one might think that since it's historical archaeological data, that we may not really require a third-party assessment of that level of CUI. So if a company is only dealing with historical archaeological data, then they could pretty much figure that they're going to only have to do a self-assessment. There are a list of other categories that are similar to that. If you go back and look through, you can pretty much decide where you would fall. Now, the one thing you have to understand, though, is if a company says, you know, today I'm dealing with historical archaeological data and I only have to do a self-assessment, but tomorrow I want to compete on a requirement that's in that other category, then you're going to have to get a third-party assessment. And it only takes your interest in participating in one contract at the higher level to drive you to get that certification. So, and to my mind's eye, once you go down that path, you might as well maintain it, right? Because it's just the assessment factor. Now, level 3 is now going to be performed by the DIBCAC, the government individuals here in the United States. And so what a company will have to do is they will go get a third-party assessment done for the level 2, and then the government entity will come in and do that delta assessment. Now, undoubtedly, as we move forward with our international agreements, that's something that we're going to have to discuss and work through how our international partners that might need to be at the level 3 would get that assessment, because we do understand that there are sensitivities from our partners as to having U.S. individuals come in and do an assessment on their DIB partners network. So that's something that we'll have to move forward with in our discussions coming forward. Another thing that we looked at when we did our review was the fact that we needed POAMs and waivers. So, you know, when we did CMMC 1.0, we said no POAMs, you either are or you aren't. And we took a look at that and felt like that might have been a little bit harsh. And so what we did is, if you are familiar with the DoD assessment methodology, the requirements in the NIST 800-171 today are categorized as having 5 points, 3 points, or 1 point. So for a company to achieve an allowable POAM, you would have to meet 85% of the requirements of the NIST 800-171, and you could POAM those requirements that are categorized as being a weight of 1, except for the FIPS encryption. Then you have to meet 3 out of the 5, but the last 2 points are programmable because we recognize the long pole in the tent there is getting the NIST encryption approval. And so if you're waiting for that approval to come through, you can POAM those last 2 points and move forward. For waivers are going to be handled a little bit differently. The program manager is going to have to do an assessment of the market and say, ooh, we're going after something that's so new and innovative. The probability of an individual being able to meet the requirements of a CMMC is too high. There's not a potential. They're so new to the market, they probably haven't even heard of CMMC, but this is such an emergent need, we need to move forward. So what will happen is that program manager, before an RFP, RFI ever hits the street that says, hey, we're looking for someone to help us with this, they will go to their service acquisition executive and attain a waiver from including that clause in their contract. Now, what happens then, right? Because now you've got some emergent whiz-bang thing you're looking for that's totally vulnerable. Well, that contractor who wins the award will have to pursue a CMMC certification, and it'll be time bound. I think right now we're thinking 180 days from the time of award to get certified. And there will have to be a plan in place to mitigate those vulnerabilities until that contractor becomes certified. Right? Until those vulnerabilities are closed, we've got to find a different plan to be able to protect those. Okay, so from there, what does that mean? So when we had 750 comments come in on our rule, originally when we started this down this path with CMMC 1.0, the department felt that needed only to do a 48 CFR rulemaking activity. And once we got so many comments, they were like, yeah, I guess we need to do a 32 CFR rulemaking activity. So my team had to go back. It was Groundhog Day for us. If you guys have seen that movie where every day is the same day, well, that's where we ended up, is having to do rulemaking again and restructuring and crafting the verbiage of a rule. And it's similar, but not, right? So the 32 rule has to be a lot more specific about what that language looks like and how it goes. We've crafted it. It is now an internal discussion, internal coordination within the department. We are praying that it comes out by first part of October so we can get it over to OMB. And I've been told once it goes to OMB, we are shut down from speaking. We may make an exception for some of our international partners because we're going to be talking about we didn't include international verbiage in this current rule. That will be a follow-on. But after that, we are in listen mode. We're not allowed to speak about CMMC anymore, waiting for it to come out. And the public comment, praying that comes out in March, praying that they accept us and give us an interim rule. If they allow us an interim rule, we will be able to begin implementation of CMMC starting in May of 2023. If not, we will have to wait till probably May of 2024 to go into implementation. Now, in the interim, what we've started is what is called the Joint Surveillance Program. The DoD DCMA DIBCAC team has an authority that says, hey, I can allow joint surveillance, so I can bring others in to help me with these assessments to move the bar of getting companies approved and through the process. So what has happened is companies who feel that they are ready to become CMMC certified, they negotiate the deal with their C3 PAOs. The C3 PAOs understand the scope and the boundary of the assessment. They come back to the CMMC AB and say, hey, we're ready to roll. The AB gets them on the schedule with the DIBCAC team. The DIBCAC team will come out and be there on site with the C3 PAO. during the assessment, then they will be able to ingest the C3PAO's assessment report in as their own. That will give that company a DIBCAC high assessment in the SPRS database. And our intent, because if somebody complains about it during rulemaking, we may have to change it, but our intent is once CMMC goes into effect, that DIBCAC high assessment will convert to a CMMC level 2 certification and will be in good stead for an additional 3 years, as long as that company does their annual affirmation saying that we're still in good stead, we haven't changed anything in our environment, you know, that we're still compliant. So that's the way that's working. We have done 2 so far. You know, and it's a learning process, right? So it was interesting when we first did the first joint surveillance. The concern was the C3PAO was going to be over the top and a real difficult, and we were going to have to help them along. And they actually did a great job. It was the DIBCAC team that was a little bit more nervous and uptight that we figured out we had some things. The second one went a lot faster and easier, so I think we're getting there. And so from that, I think I'm ready for your questions.
Thank you so much for a very, very interesting presentation of the state now of how the developments are on the CMMC. And I've been told by Sophie that she has coordinated with your PA that you have had some initial questions sent on beforehand, so I could maybe read them loudly. And
Yes.
And if the other CMMC guys here have any questions, please put them on in the chat or raise your hand. It's up to you. But I think we will start with the 3 questions that were sent to you. So the first one is it allowed to process CUI all or some data outside the US, particularly Denmark or the EU? That's the question.
So, well, yes, right. So if a company is a subcontractor or a prime contractor with us, and we provide you controlled unclassified information, then you have a right to have that as a function of your contract. What the requirement is, and I believe the clause 252.204-7012 is a flow down clause. So each one of the companies that are participating should have that as a requirement, which it states that 1, you have agreed that you will implement the NIST 800-171 standards and be compliant with the processes described in that clause. If you have a cyber event or a mishap or something that comes up, that you have a reporting requirement to let us know, and the steps and procedures to doing that are also included in that clause. So if you accept that clause in your contract, then you have the requirement to uphold and meet the requirements of that clause. So yes, you can have CUI, but yeah, you got to protect it. And, you know, going forward, the CMMC and even the 70/20 clause that's now a flow down requirement in contracts is the clause that says, hey, there's a provisional contract, which is 70/19, that says you need to go into the SPRS database and you need to do a self-assessment and tell us where you think you are on the implementation of those 800-171 requirements. And then the 70/20 clause says, hey, if you accept this clause, the DIBCAC, if they feel the need to come in and check to make sure you've implemented these, you will allow them to come into your spaces and do that assessment.
Thank you so much. I'm not quite sure who raised the question originally, but if the guy who raised the question has any further questions on this topic, was it, who was it? You're okay? All right, maybe we have an additional comment from Jesper from Commander Rasmussen.
Yes, good morning, Stacy. It's still morning for us over here on the east coast of the US. So so happy to see you, and so happy that you have agreed to do this for us. We've been discussing this before, and it's extraordinarily relevant for us that you take your time. So thank you very much for that initially. So as you mentioned, the CMMC, even CMMC 2.0, it's in a decision process. Rulemaking is underway, and it still leaves us a little bit in a void. In a decision void, to be a little bit in my lingo here, and so that leads me to ask you, if you were an international company doing business in the US with the US DIB, what would your first issues to attend to be? Just like one or two things that you would immediately look to make sure that you would be ready to continue your cooperation with your US counterparts come March 23.
So I think, you've got to look at your cybersecurity, right? And I think the thing that you have to attend to as a viable company is the fact that you have unique capabilities that you bring to bear. That's why you've been asked to participate, and you want to protect those. And the protections start with the NIST 800-171 compliance, which is the baseline bare minimum, right? That's not really that much. If you talk to, and I'm not one, so, I have a hard time here, but the cyber geeks, which you guys might be, right? I mean, if you really talk to the true geeks, they're like, look, the 800-171 is really just the bare minimum basics, right? It's the kind of stuff that people really ought to be doing at home to keep my nosy neighbor out of my Netflix account, right? And being able to steal my internet. And companies, I think we have been lulled into a state of complacency, right? When you talk to companies and CEOs, they're kind of like, nobody's trying to steal my information. But yet you find out that there are companies who have, when you do business with the DoD, you have a cage code, right? Which is how you get paid and the way your accounts are set up. There are people out there, not necessarily state actors, going in, stealing that cage code information and redirecting companies' payments to their bank accounts, right? I met a guy down in South Carolina. He was a construction contractor, right? So $40,000 lost payment to him was a big deal. It would be to me if I lost a $40,000 payment myself, right? And so he's calling the government going, hey, where's my money? And they're like, we paid you. And he's like, no, you didn't. And they're like, oh, yeah, we did. And so when they went back and looked, somebody had gotten in and redirected his information to their bank account. Now, the federal government doesn't have another $40,000 to make him whole, right? We're budgeted down to the penny, and we don't have an extra 40K. So he's like, well, who can help me? And you go to the Department of Justice saying, hey, some nasty thief stole my money. And what do they say? Yeah, $40,000. We don't have resources to cover down on something that small. Sorry for your luck, right? So that guy's just totally, he's out his $40,000. And so, there are things going on that haven't been widely publicized that are impacting companies that can be fixed by paying attention to your cybersecurity. And I think, there's a misnomer where companies are like, I've never been hacked. No, you just don't know you haven't been hacked or that you have been hacked, right? Because everybody's got somebody nosing around in their stuff, waiting for that one instance where you let your guard down and they can either swipe your intellectual property, they can swipe my data, they can swipe your bank account information, because it's all about them getting rich or degrading the capabilities of our alliance to put themselves over us, right? And I think, it's difficult because it's not a visible war that we're in cyberspace, right? I mean, you hear about the Columbia pipeline and you hear about solar winds and things like that, but it's not a tangible visual sighting, right? It's not a blown up building. It's not dead bodies on the ground, but it is a true impact to our capability and our livelihood, but it's not as real for people to really be able to hit home. But we are in a war. We are at war in cyberspace, and we've got to start protecting ourselves, or our way of life is going to be impacted.
Thank you. That's the answer you wanted, Jesper, or maybe you didn't want.
No, thank you very much, Stacy. As
Well, it's
always,
the one I got.
very
I'm
insightful.
Jasper.
I wonder if there should be any follow-up questions or related questions to Ms. Bosjanik about this topic here.
Well, the faces on the screen aren't asleep, so I think I
No.
think I'm doing halfway decent, right?
I think they're
And
very excited.
yeah, right.
But we have another question here. It's related, but it says as the following: which CUI are non-US citizens allowed to handle inside or outside the US, and which are not?
So I don't believe there are restrictions on the handling of CUI. One of the things that we did for CMMC for the assessors, we said the people that were going into US companies to do the assessments of their network needed to have a tier 3 suitability determination, and they needed to be US persons or not have any foreign ownership and control issues where they have close and continuing contact with people that we would consider to be detrimental, right? So, but it's very hard because we in the US have to be fair to all. So then you can't go out and say, look, if you got a friend over here, we aren't going to let you play. So we had to kind of make a one fell swoop. And as you've seen, other countries have come back and said, you know, hey, we don't want US people coming in looking at our networks, right? So I have a funny feeling that everybody has a similar perspective. I know that there are foreign countries operating in the US that would like to be able to be one of our C3 PAOs and do those assessments. But at this point in time, because of the nature and the information that they have access to for our DIB partners, we felt that it needed to be maintained as a US person or company in the US doing those networks. Now, as we move forward and make this a global initiative, right, I can foresee that we set up CMMC capabilities in each country, and they have similar things. I mean, what we would ask if Denmark set up assessors, that they would go through a similar process as in having a tier 3 secret. It's the same background investigation that you go through to get a secret clearance, right? We would look to make sure that everybody had a standard level for the protection of this, because I think it is extremely important for us to make sure that the integrity of this process is maintained and that everything is handled in a consistent manner across the board, right? Because it's not right for ABC company to get a wink and a nod and get off easy and somebody else be held to a higher standard. And we've got to make sure that the protections are all there. And if we don't do this in a consistent manner, there's going to be a vulnerability or a gap somewhere else that we're going to have to deal with.
Thanks a lot. Any comment to this response from Ms. Bocciani? All right, we have a sorry. We have a third one here that was sent to you. It's how would you recommend a non-US company to organize operations or location of IT when delivering to both DoD and the commercial market?
Well, so, you know, it's interesting because people who have a DoD division and a commercial division, and they don't always cross over. But the requirements of the NIST 800-171 are just good cyber hygiene practices. And so really, if you so desired to have them go across your entire enterprise, you would just be that much more protected. Now, I do understand that there are some things that don't play well in the sandbox with each other. So therefore, you might have some part of your enterprise that you don't want to break some application that you have before, and so therefore you make the risk determination not to include it. But to be honest with you, across the board, our adversaries aren't just looking for DoD data, they're looking for anything that can make them a quick buck and put them ahead of us, right? And I'm sorry, I don't want them getting rich off of my blood, sweat, and tears, right? I think that's the part that really irritates me. You look at the people who, the F-35 look-alike that's flying around in one of the other countries today, right? And I worked for the agency that was putting that together, and I remember those poor engineers and scientists working, late into the night to figure out why some portion of that aircraft wasn't working correctly. And they went through hours and hours and hours and painstaking effort to make sure that that thing worked correctly. And these guys come in and steal all that information in 10 minutes and never had to spend one dime to develop it. Right? Why are we making it easy? And sadly, it's our laziness that is making it easy on them.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive answer. We have a question from Christian Skellerup from Compitech. Maybe, Christian, you can just present very briefly your company and what's your interest in the US DoD market.
Certainly. So I'm Christian Skellerup from Compitech. We're an affiliate company of the Sharp Group, and we work within consulting. So a lot of maturity assessments, including CMMC, which we're looking into at the moment. So referring back to the CUI discussion, one of the main issues that we have faced so far with the couple of clients we have had is really getting our heads around the CUI. Not the concept of CUI, but getting down to the facts. What are the CUI being handled by each of our clients? And it's, I know that it's supposed to be written in the contracts what CUI are being handled, but that unfortunately has not been the case in any of the clients we have worked with. So I'm very happy that you said that you would issue a list of CUIs. When is that coming out, and how comprehensive is it? So
probably won't see it until March of next year because it's going to have to come out with the public comments with the rule now. But let's think about this, right? So a couple things. There's an education program that needs to happen within our own spaces with our government employees as well. So you have controlled unclassified information, you have contractor-derived information, you have controlled technical information, right? So some of the data is going to be developed and derived by those companies, right? So then you've got to look at that listing that we talked about that's already out there. It's already public on the DoD site of all the different CUI categories. Now, one may have to do some intuitive intellectual review to say, well, I think this applies, right? And then when you start looking at the different categories, hopefully it'll be kind of evident which ones we think are like, yeah, that's important, right? If our adversary got a hold of a piece of this, it could be detrimental. They might glean some information that we may not want them to have. I think the harder part, and where my intelligence brethren kind of get a little anxious, is the fact that, some of these categories and some of this information in and of themselves don't really mean a hill of beans. But when you start gathering these together and putting them all in the same place, right, it could draw you a map or give you an indicator of something that we may not want our adversaries to have. So, there is always going to be a challenge, and there's always going to be a where somebody's going to go, nope, oh, that's got to be protected. That's CUI. And we're all going to cock our heads like the dogs do when they look at you like, what the heck are you talking about, right? Why do I think that's important? But there's some other thing going on, right? And we're just going to have to accept it and not fight it because there's something that we've got to figure out later. Okay. So it's kind of a non-answer, I'm sorry, because it's kind of like, you got to wait for the list to come out and then we got to figure this out. Hopefully some of the trainings and even the CUI training that's out there now, right? It says it's got to be marked and this, that, and the other. I think, there's going to be a fine line. I think at first you'll probably see people marking stuff that you're like, yeah, no, they're overkill. And then once they figure out that there's a dollar value associated with that, then they're going to go the other way and we're going to have to right align it. So it's going to be a work in progress. And the only thing I can say is really the NIST 800-171, like we've talked before, is like, it's the basics. It should be done whether you got CUI or not, just to protect yourselves. And that's not the greatest protections. The one thing, now I'm getting on my soapbox. You guys started it, you did it, is the fact that, this is to protect ourselves and our intellectual property, right? To protect the freedoms and the things that we all love and enjoy based on the way our countries have set up our governments. And there are those out there that want to be king of the world, right? They want to take over. They want to be superior. They want to be able to take us down and cut us at our knees. And so, the thing that I think we're being naive is thinking nobody's trying to get my information. Nobody's interested in me. No, they are. And we need to not only do the NIST 800-171, but we need to be tracking what the threats are and staying one step ahead. We've got to get to the point where we can anticipate where they're coming and understand what they want and stay one step ahead of them. Right? When you hear that the kids in the neighborhood are robbing cars, what do? You take your keys out of your car, you start bringing them in the house, and you lock the doors on the car, right? You stay one step ahead of that threat to make sure, right? That's why I have my 4 small 100+ pound dogs with me, right? If anybody wants, let's see if I can do this. No, that's enough. But they are here to help protect me so that when my husband goes out of town, I have an early warning system, right? I'm staying one step ahead of the threat. And that's what we have to do to be able to secure our quality of life for ourselves and our children going forward. Okay, I'm stepping off my soapbox. Next question.
Thank you so much. This is really, really interesting because in my view, you touch very much upon not only the technological eligibility side, but also the cultural side, because culture and respect and understanding of the dangers or the hazards we're into here is quite magnificent. And that's one of the things that was the reason behind this network. It was to partly create awareness through understanding the need for culture, but also, of course, to look at the technological and commercial things. And maybe Ulrich and René, the 2 consultants that have dug very deep into CMMC and other security standards, could maybe tell about your challenges to imposing a CMMC security culture in the Danish defense industrial base. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on that, and then we could maybe hear Stacey's comments on that. Thank you.
Sure, I can start with a comment. We've experienced with a lot of the companies that they find it difficult to adhere to the FedRAMP requirements when placing data on cloud services. Do you know if there's going to be any improvements on that side, or
So
are we looking into only using cloud service providers within the US?
So interesting you should say that. And of course, I get to use my line, right? We have made some decisions about what we will expect to see, but it's in the rule and has to wait till March.
Okay.
So we're going to have a reveal party, right? But one of the things that we are looking at, and we do have partners out in industry, AWS, Microsoft, those that are coming up with solutions and capabilities that they feel will meet the requirements of the NIST 800-171 that companies can buy. And ultimately, you know, I think one of the things that we've seen and heard from our industry partners in the US and around the world is it's expensive and it's difficult, right? And I think some of the smaller companies that here in the US, we have companies, I don't know if you guys have the same over there, that, you know, their cousin or their nephew comes home from college and does the updates on their systems for them because, you know, it's just a mom and pop shop, right? And so those companies are kind of like, look, just tell me what button to push to make myself secure, right? Because I don't know, do I push that one over there or what do I do? And we can't, as a government, tell them what button to push, because if we do and it messes up, we're liable, right? So we can't, and each network is set up totally differently. So one of the areas that we've been encouraged by, but we're not there yet, is that companies like AWS and Microsoft have been working with other people that have applications that would bolt on top of their cloud, that if implemented, you would meet the requirements of the NIST 800-171. So to that end, if we can, the CMMC assessment would then just be a quick assessment that you've implemented those things correctly, and you'd be off and running. And so I think I've said this publicly, so I can say it again. And if not, I've at least said it publicly now, so I can say it again. Is that's one of the things that we're thinking about, right? Especially since our foreign partners are kind of like, yeah, we don't want to let US companies come in and do an assessment and vice versa. So is it something that's potential that we said, all right, look, if you guys all participate in this cloud with these tools, you're good to go. We just need somebody in Denmark to go do an assessment that you've implemented it correctly, provide us that information, and we're good, which could ostensibly be the easy button we're hoping to push, right? Because that would make it, as long as it was affordable, right? I think that's the other side of it. So yes, right? So we're hoping, and we've put decisions together of what we would accept, what body of evidence needs to be provided as far as people using those things in our rule that'll come out in March. But if you think about it, the 7012 clause today tells you that you must be FedRAMP moderate, right? So what body of evidence would you have to provide me to prove that you met the compliance of being FedRAMP moderate equivalent? You might be able to figure it out. You might go overboard and do more than what we said, and then be happy when my rule comes out and you're, oh, I don't have to do as much. Hopefully.
Thank you so much. This is really interesting. I wonder if, Ulrich, do you have a comment? You have a lot of experience in dealing with these issues as well. You need to unmute yourself.
Unmute myself. I hope that helps.
Yes, it
Hi,
does.
Stacey. My name is Ulrich, and I've been part of this network from the beginning, working with Jesper and Klaus and Renee as well. And we've been following, you know, all the way from the first version of CMC 1.0 and now the 2.0. I think that the $1 million question, you already answered that, is that what are we going to do about C3PAOs in Denmark? Because there are some companies that can basically, and that's going to end up, you know, self-assessment for CMC level 1, but there are some companies as well that, you know, already store and process CUI, so they're going to need to have, you know, a CMC level 2 certification. You already told me that, you know, you were looking into, you know, doing some, probably a C3PAO in Denmark or something. But do you think that you can, I think that, you know, when you have the final rule next year, and you're going to quite fast after that, I think, going to implement it in contracts. Do you think that something will come out so we can start moving in Denmark, you know, when the Scandinavian countries setting up C3PAOs and so on?
So I think we need to, so each country has to decide how they want to handle it, right? So like UK has their cyber essentials, Australia has the essential 8, and Canada is getting ready to set, I think they're going to set up a cyber standard, right? So each country has to decide how they want to handle CMMC, whether or not I would love right? For countries to say, we're going to meet the NIST 800-171. The CMMC AB can help you set up an AB over there, or you could use them. You could use their training and their exams. There's all kinds of agreements that can work through and happen. But each country has to make a decision of how they want to address it, and then we have to negotiate a deal to make sure we're all in agreement that all our equities are met and accepted. Right now, like I said before, if we say, hey, we're not going to worry about your networks and your companies, if y'all just use this cloud service provider with these tools, we accept that and we're good to go. But we're not there yet. We don't have we don't have those lined up and approved or evaluated. Nor would the government be able to say, hey, if you use this one, right, what we're going to have to say is, hey, these capabilities have been certified as being acceptable and meeting the requirement, and you choose what you want to do, whether you want to have your own network certified, whether or not you want to use the cloud service. You have to make that determination.
That makes sense. It's like, we both have two scenarios here. Is one that, you can place your data in an American data center, like Microsoft's CMC High, and what they've built is quite good. The main problem being here is that, a lot of the companies in Denmark, they're manufacturing, parts for the large American primes, and they have, operation technology and so on in-house. So we're working on that. It's going to be interesting to see, how the OT part is going to be part of CMC in the future. That's a major problem with old systems not being able to update them and so on.
Yes. OT is the bane of all of our existence, especially since we've got some old machines that can't. So how do you handle that? That's been that'll be next. I feel like Scarlett O'Hara right now. I can't think about that today. I'll think about that tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe Jesper. I think that maybe Jesper can elaborate a little bit about how these discussions is going on, concerning what we should do in Denmark.
I'll just get my microphone down here. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Ulrich. So we are trying to discuss this in Denmark and what kind of organization we need to set up to fulfill this. But obviously, for a government decision, like all government's decisions, i.e., for instance, the decision on CMMC 2.0 and rulemaking process, it is not necessarily a very swift process. Right now, we do have certification agencies under our equivalent to ANS in the US. That would be DALO and for us that do handle some of the AS 9001 certifications, some of the ISO certifications, so on and so forth. So for Denmark, what the big issue is going to be, will we go forward with CMMC 2.0 and make that also the Danish standard, or will we negotiate that we instead will work for ISO 27001, 2, 3, whatever it may be, to be the equivalent the equivalent standard in Denmark? That is the decision that's out to be made.
Yeah, and we've done the crosswalk with the 27001 and 2 and 3, and they don't meet all of the NIST 800-171 standards. They don't track. So that would be something that would be a difficulty for us to accept that. We have had discussion, but like he said, it's not a rapid thing. Do we establish a new ISO standard that we can all agree on that ups the bar a little bit? But I think that takes years and years and years, and to be honest with you, I don't know that I'll still be working in the federal government that long. I'm getting old. You see all these wrinkles, it's like I may need to find a place on the beach somewhere.
But anyway, as you say, Stacy, if we talk about, that CMC is going to be, finalized next year, and you're gonna quite rapidly after that gonna implement it in contract, as demand in contracts. I think that the problem for us will also be, how to move forward, because companies are getting contracts all the time and want to, be part
Yeah.
of tenders and so on. If they don't have any ability, because there are nothing settled about this. I think that's one of the questions we are getting all the time from some of the VRBs in Denmark.
And it's unfortunate because, to be honest with you, in my dream world, people don't need CMMC. They just need to get secure, right? And it's a shame that I'm having to push this requirement to get people to recognize that they need to do what they need to do to be secure, right? I mean, CMMC is a forcing function for something that people should recognize they need to do and just do.
Agreed.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
I
you
think-
guys are quite welcome anytime. I do have to say, oh, I'm going to be in trouble. I have another meeting that I have to get on a different device that takes 5 minutes to log into.
So yeah, but we are running out of time, so it's fine. We are very, very grateful for your open discussions with us and the presentation, and we're very happy and honored to have you here. It's really a motivation for our CMMM network here to have you, and we look very much forward to maybe having you again after March next year.
Yes.
And if all you guys haven't had enough of Stacy Bosniak, please get up tonight at 3 a.m. Danish local time, and you will be online again from the DoD presentation, as I saw on your profile. So, but thank you so much, and on behalf of all the network, thanks a lot for all you did for us here. Thank you.
Oh, anytime. You guys take care. Thank you so much. You guys take care. Bye.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you very much.